Make an announcement that Chair Troy Waymaster, Chair of Appropriations, broke his ankle, so Troy will not be here today. He is recovering from surgery and he is on WebEx. So again, send our best to Troy. We'll start out here with our joint meeting, and first item we'll have is a briefing on the fall human service consensus caseloads. And we'll start out with Megan Leopold, Legislative Research. Megan, welcome committee.
Thank you. Good morning. I'll be summarizing the human services caseload estimates. We made these estimates in November. And at the end of the gray memo that you have in front of you, there is a nice table that summarizes all of the details that I'm going to provide with you. The 2025 estimates are a re-estimate, a revisiting of prior estimates, and the fiscal year 26 estimates that we'll be presenting are new. The 2025 estimates are being compared to the budget that was passed by the last session, the legislature, and it is adjusted for reappropriations. So in fiscal year 2025, as compared to our spring estimates, we saw an all funds increase of $100 million, and that includes an SGF decrease of $23 million. For TANF, there was an increase of $400,000, and that is due to higher utilization for the program. In foster care, we saw a decrease of $1.8 million, and that includes an increase of $3 million SGF, and that is partially due to decreased savings, lower savings than anticipated for the relative licensing program. For CanCare Medical in fiscal year 25, we have an increase of $114 million, and that includes a decrease of $20 million SGF. That all funds increase is largely due to MCO rate adjustments. These were adjustments that were made for the mid-year 2023 and calendar year 2024 adjustments. So they went back into priorly paid rates to be adjusted. We also had a rebase of the CCBHCs, or Certified Community Behavioral Health Centers, and that was, they're rebased at an average of 27%. This is a requirement as a part of the state's participation in a demonstration grant for CCBHCs. This increase, however, was offset by part of the grant including a higher federal match. So the federal match that is as part of this grant that goes towards the CCBCs is closer to that of the CHIP program, which is a higher federal match. And that accrued a savings of approximately $20.4 million SGF in fiscal year 25. The all funds increase was offset by lower membership levels. The membership levels dropped following the unwinding period, slightly lower than anticipated in the spring. We also had a decrease in payments for deliveries. The SGF decrease that you see is largely due to reappropriations that were carried over from fiscal year 24. There is $63.6 million in reappropriations. For KDAD's non-CanCare, we saw a decrease of $12 million, and that's a decrease of $6 million SGF, and this is largely due to lower than anticipated participation in the PACE program. For fiscal year 26, we see an all funds increase of $199 million, and that is an SGF increase of $72 million, and this is above the fiscal year 25 estimates. There is no change in the estimate for TANF. For foster care, we saw a decrease of $13.7 million, and that includes a decrease of $12.1 million SGF. This is largely due to an additional payment that was made in fiscal year 2024 as the payments for the foster care contracts moved from being retrospective to prospective. There was an additional cause for the decrease was that 3 of the case management providers are projecting decreased caseloads in fiscal year 26. CanCare Medical in fiscal year 26 saw an increase of $206 million. That includes $80 million SGF. This is largely due to a full year of those increased rates for the managed care organizations. Fiscal year 24 saw only a half a year of those increased rates. There is also an increase in membership. The membership is estimated to just slightly go up beyond what it is now in fiscal year 26. There was also a change in the pay-for-performance recoups. In fiscal year 25, that estimate included the recoups of pay-for-performance for 2 years, whereas in fiscal year 26, it only includes it for 1 year. And that offsets the SGF. The SGF increase is due to an FMAP decrease. The FMAP changed from 61.65 in fiscal year 25 to 60.97 in fiscal year 26. This increased the state share by 6.68%, or about $30.4 million. We also had a full year of the CCBHC rebase, which caused an increase of $94 million, and that is 25.7 SGF. But like in fiscal year 25, this was offset by the higher federal match level. There's also a 3.75 inflationary increase for nursing facilities included in fiscal year 26, which added $33 million and $13 million SGF. That increase is offset by the elimination of the Medicaid add-on for nursing facilities. This was added by the legislature for fiscal year 25 and is not included in the fiscal year 26 budget. Finally, for KDAD's non-can care in fiscal year 26, we had an increase of $6.4 million, and this includes $4 million SGF. That's largely due to that 3.75 inflationary increase for fee-for-service and mental health assessments, as well as a population increase in the PACE program. And with that, I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Megan. Questions? Senator Petty.
Megan, in that last one, you just mentioned about an increase in the PACE program, but earlier you had mentioned that that there was a decrease in participation in the PACE program.
Megan?
So in 2025, sorry, my pages are out of order. In 2026, there was an increase in the PACE population. So when you see the decrease and the increase, it's as compared to the prior year estimate. So it doesn't always necessarily mean that there's actually a decrease or an increase. It just means that if in the prior year we anticipated that it would increase at 6%, but it actually increased at 5%, that's looks like a decrease in our estimates.
Thank you.
Other questions? Representative Ballard.
Thank you very much. Oh, again, would you repeat TANF? I couldn't hear exactly what you said. I think you said we are at the same level that we normally are.
For TANF?
Yes.
Right. There was no change in 26, and in 25, it increased by 400,000, and that was for higher utilization.
You said higher utilization.
Right. A higher utilization, more members using the TANF cash assistance.
Oh, okay. And that's kind of new right now.
It was higher than what was anticipated in the previous estimate.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Megan. Next, we'll have the fall education consensus estimates. Jennifer Light. Jennifer, welcome to committee. Pardon me?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In front of you, you have a 11.5 by 14 goldenrod piece of paper. This has all of the numbers for the fall 2024 education consensus estimates on it. As a quick overview, fiscal year 2025, there is $5.8 billion for as a new adjustment for fall education consensus, with $4.8 billion in SGF. In fiscal year '26, this is $6 billion with $4.9 billion SGF. The base aid for students excellence, which is the base for the state foundation aid, in fiscal year 2025 is $5,378, which is the same as it was in the spring. For fiscal year 2026, it is $5,611, which is an increase of 4.3%, which is due to the CPIU 3-year average. And for fiscal year 2027, the revised estimate is, or the new estimate for this year would be $5,762, which is an increase of 2.7%. For state foundation aid for fiscal year 2025, it is $3.7 billion, which is a decrease of $180.3 million from the spring estimate. Fiscal year 26, it's $3.9 billion, which is a decrease of $192.3 million from the appropriation. This includes a $2.8 billion SGF. For fiscal year 27, it's $4.0 billion, which is an increase of $104 million from fiscal year 2026. The decreases in 25 and 26 are mainly due to the fact that the 24 legislation did include appropriations of higher SGF amounts in anticipation of the tax changes that did not occur during the session, but did occur during the special session. So we did do adjustments based on what the final tax came out with in the special session. For supplemental state aid, this for fiscal year 2025, it's $595 million, which is a decrease of $3 million from the appropriation. Fiscal year 26, it's $621 million, which is a decrease of $4 million. And for fiscal year 2027, it's $637 million, which is an increase of $16 million from fiscal year 2026. For special education, fiscal year 2025 was anticipated to be slightly higher due to reappropriations. Fiscal year 2026 and 2027 is $601 million, which comes out to about 72% of excess costs in fiscal year 26 and 68.4% in fiscal year 2027. For capital outlay, fiscal year 2025 is $103 million, which is the same as previously done. Fiscal year 26 is $107 million, which is an increase of $4 million. Fiscal year 26 is $107 million. Fiscal year 27 is $111 million, which is an increase of $4 million above the fiscal year 2026 number. For capital improvement state aid, fiscal year 2025 is $208 million, which is just a slight increase of $500,000. Fiscal year 26 and 27 are also $208 million. For CAPERS USDs, which would be for any employees of the school districts. For fiscal year 2025, the adjusted estimate is $509.1 million. Fiscal year 26 is $527.6 million, and fiscal year 27 it's $528 million. For CAPERS non-USDs, which includes interlocals, co-ops, community colleges, technical colleges, and education associations, which is the Kansas High School Athletics Association, fiscal year 2025's revised estimate is $72.3 million, fiscal year 26 is $75.3 million, and fiscal year 27 is $74.6 million. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you. Questions? Senator Petty.
So, Megan, thank you. When I look at that special ed funding, so I see that the percentage is going down. Is that due to the fact of the infusion of the one-time money for 25?
So, Mr. Chair, every year and every estimate, we take it against what the dollars are and the students that are currently in. So there is an anticipated, as we go between 25, 26, and 27, there is an anticipated increase in need in special education, which would, as long as we're maintaining the same dollar amount, would indicate that the percentage would go down.
Thank you.
Other questions? Representative Osley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the supplemental state aid, the decrease of the decrease in 25 and 26, and then the increase in 27. What's the reasoning behind that?
Mr. Chair, supplemental state aid is based on property tax. Currently, for the fiscal year 2025, they can go up to 32.05% of the total foundation aid, I believe. We are getting close to that 33% max overall, which is what is in statute. The decrease comes down because there is more money coming in from the property tax. And the anticipation is that over time, the increase in property taxes will not be as drastic. So there is an anticipated in 27 for that reason.
Thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Next, we'll have a briefing on consensus revenue estimates with Edward Pinner, Legislative Research. Edward, welcome committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committees. You should have in front of you on white paper a 10-page memo from our office and the Division of the Budget dated November 22nd, 2024. This is what we commonly refer to as the long memo. It includes both the revenue estimates for the state and also the economic forecast for the state that is implicit within those estimates. Today, I will be presenting just the revenue estimates, which are primarily found, and I will be primarily presenting from tables 1 and 2 at the back of the memo. Beginning on table 1, the newly revised estimate for fiscal year 2025 was set at $9.732 billion, excuse me. This represents a decline of $407.8 million or 4.0% relative to the final FY 2024 receipts. The taxes only portion of the estimate was set at $9.65 million, which represents a decline of $353.7 million or 3.5% relative to the final FY 2024 receipts. Tax policy changes account for more than 100% of that year-over-year decline, and we would see anticipated growth in receipts, but for those various tax policy changes. I'll highlight a few of what those are for you, just so you can kind of be aware of them and have them in your mind. The food sales tax rate on state food and food ingredients has now been reduced to 0% as of January 1, and so that is a continued reduction relative to FY 2024. Last year, during the regular session of the legislature, you all enacted tax bills that had total state general fund revenue impacts of $67.9 million. Of course, during the special session, you all enacted another tax bill that had a state general fund revenue impact for fiscal year 2025 of $416.3 million. And then the final kind of key tax policy change there relative to the year-over-year impacts is that this is the first full year of a corporation income tax rate reduction associated with the Apex project. And also this is the first year in which we anticipate Panasonic actually claiming investment tax credits and the revenue impact of that hitting the state general fund. From there, I would flip over to table 2 for FY 2025, where you can see our actual revisions relative to the prior estimates. You can see that we revised the estimate downwards by $59.8 million or 0.6%, and the total taxes were revised downwards by $72.2 million or 0.7%. In terms of individual sources, we revised individual income tax estimates upwards by $113.8 million. We revised corporation income taxes downwards by $211.5 million, and sales and use taxes were combined to be revised upwards by $47.1 million. Everything else was kind of revised downwards in terms of total taxes by $20.4 million, and non-tax receipts were revised upwards by $12.4 million. The bulk of that was in agency earnings, which is largely unclaimed property. Flipping back over to table 1 to visit the FY 2026 estimates, you can see that for FY 2026, we set the initial estimate at $9.846 billion, which represents an increase of $114.1 million or 1.2% over the newly revised fiscal year 2025 estimate. We increased total taxes year over year by $200 million moving on to individual sources, we increased the individual income tax estimate by $200 million or 4.7%. A portion of that increase is attributable to a smaller second-year impact from the special session tax bill than the first-year impact due to the retroactivity of that bill. We have a $10 million or 0.7% increase in corporation income taxes. This increase would be larger, but for the anticipated second tranche of investment tax credits from the Apex Panasonic project coming online in that year. We do have a small growth of $5 million or 0.1% in sales and use taxes. This growth is partially tempered by the fact that fiscal year 2026 will be a full year of 0% state sales and use tax on food and food ingredients, as opposed to a half year at 2% and a half year at 0%. However, the growth in sales and use tax that we've seen in recent years is also tempered by kind of an expected return to the long-term shift in the economy from purchases of taxable goods to purchases of largely untaxed services. That's something that has been happening for a long time in both the state and national economy. There was somewhat of a reversion of that trend during the pandemic, but we now kind of expect that to be fully back towards the pre-pandemic trend. Otherwise, we are forecasting a decline of non-tax revenue from FY 2025 to FY 2026 of $99.4 million. This is largely attributable to reduced interest earnings as interest rates are expected to decline throughout the forecast period, and also the available pool of state funds for investing in resulting in SGF interest is expected to decline throughout the forecast period. And with that, I would happily stand for whatever questions the committees may have.
Thank you, Eddie. Questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Eddie. Appreciate it. Next up, we'll have a briefing on the governor's budget recommendations with Adam Profit, Director of Division of Budget. Adam, welcome committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, very good to see you guys again. I think I will, if it's okay with the chair, wait just a moment. The presentation should be being passed around in hard copy. So we'll wait until everybody has a version before we get started.
Thank you.
And I think we're also getting loaded online so that we can project during this.
Christmas time.
You really know what I thought she did. Oh, yeah. We'll be the bad guys on the two deals. She didn't have anything.
I think we could find Sean's found a few.
Well, there's all kinds of many colors.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah.
If we could just say,
A few years ago, I was gonna propose something, and I did, and I looked there, I got $50 million just in 10 minutes.
we should even try that in committee. Well, you know what? Let's exchange this program for this.
So do you have a Doge committee in the House?
We don't specifically have a Doge committee.
It is that
Yeah.
large.
Oh, I know.
I think we'll dig in there pretty good.
But I feel like we'll find places for it.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Chair, I believe each of the members has a packet at this point, so if it's okay with the chair, I'll go ahead and get started.
Yes, please proceed. Thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you very much. As mentioned, my name is Adam Profit. I'm the Budget Director for the state of Kansas. I believe I've been in front of many of you over the past couple of years, but for the new ones, nice to meet you all and hope to work with you over the next couple of months to make sure that we build a sustainable and palatable budget and one that moves the state's interests forward. Today, I'll be reviewing the governor's budget recommendation and all the work that she's put into this. I think we should land in a very good spot. So we'll move past the agenda and straight to the budget priorities, which is on slide 3. And the page numbers are a little bit faint, but they're on the bottom right. And we'll have this going in real time online as well. So when we sat down with the governor over this fall and started talking about crafting a budget and what that's going to look like, her starting point is always the out years and never the current budget year. Want to make sure that when she's building a budget, she's focused on the sustainability component and making sure that out years we're able to sustain this as well. To that end, trying to minimize the year-over-year expenditures for fiscal 26. As you just heard from Eddie, the revenue growth for all of the SGF revenues is returning to what you might call a historical norm. So in fiscal 26, total taxes are increasing by 2.2% over fiscal 25. That's not on this sheet here. And then total revenues are increasing in the neighborhood of 1 to 1.5%. So the goal is to have expenditures that fall below that number or match that number. That's the best place that we can get to long-term stability. Looking at healthy ending balances, both the SGF and the stabilization fund. So we'll work towards that at the end of the presentation to show where we're landing. And with the limited resources that we have available this year for enhancements, Governor is focused on investing in high-impact policy areas. I've got those policy areas that we're going to focus on today listed there, and we'll walk through each of those throughout the next 30 minutes or so. I won't spend any time on this revenue estimates table, but we always like to include it just as a point of reference. Eddie does a very good job of explaining this and all of the changes, so I won't try to top that. But again, in the orange boxes, you can see the two numbers that we're targeting. Total taxes, fiscal 26 over 25 is a 2.2% increase. Total revenues is a 1% increase. The total taxes line is one that is kind of our North Star. That's the vast majority of this. So that's what we're looking at year over year. So one of the first things the governor wanted to get into with this year's budget is making sure that we're doing good budgetary practices and looking at reappropriations. So the first step that we did is in fiscal 25, we did see a large amount of reappropriations pull from fiscal 24 into 25 to the tune of about $619 million. Admittedly, that's significantly higher than we would like to see, but not all reappropriations are bad reappropriations. Quite often, a reappropriation from one fiscal year into another fiscal year just represents a timing mismatch of when a project is completed versus when the funding was available. So think about a capital project. You might be appropriated the full freight of the capital project in 1 year, but it takes a couple of years to complete. Therefore, you have a reappropriation. I'm happy to report that we did lapse $375 million out of fiscal 25. So again, there was $619.5 million of reappropriations. The governor is recommending lapsing about $375 million from the fiscal 25 budget. Also want to spend some time talking about how reappropriations impact the out year. When you have a reappropriation from 1 year to the next, it does not increase the base expenditures. The reappropriation does not move into the baseline, what we call the base expenditure line that carries forward in perpetuity. And I've put an example on this piece of paper to kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about. And with apologies to the Adjutant General's office, they happen to be first alphabetically, so they're the first agency that pulled on here. But you can see in fiscal 25, their approved budget that this legislature approved last year in May was about $13.4 million. You can see that on the bottom left. They had reappropriations that carried from fiscal 24 into fiscal 25 of about $19 million. So their new fiscal 25 approved, if you will, was $32.5 million. That's their base appropriation plus the reappropriation in fiscal 25. If you slide out to the orange box on the right, what the governor is recommending for a fiscal 26 appropriation is only $15.184 million. Right, so that's just demonstrating that the reappropriation is really isolated to fiscal 25. It does not add into the fiscal 26 base. I just want to make sure we're clear on what does and does not go in there. Moving forward, we talked about, we're on slide 7 now, talked about trying to minimize new spending for fiscal 26, and we had that target in mind. So the governor's budget recommendation that we are getting ready to walk through the details of, the fiscal 26 SGF represents a 0.7% increase over the fiscal 25 SGF budget that was approved by this body in May of last year. So it's a $70 million increase in fiscal 26 relative to what this legislature approved for fiscal 25. That's a 0.7% increase. So again, really laser focused on trying to keep spending to a minimum and keep those spending growth to a minimum. And you can see what the functions in government, how each of those moved year over year. Now, I think the first question would probably be, yeah, but we had some one-time appropriations in fiscal 25, so it's easy to get there, right? And that is true. There was a level of one-time appropriations in fiscal 25, which would come out in fiscal 26. So on slide 8 here, we've inserted a waterfall chart that shows the starting point is the far left blue column. That was the total SGF approved appropriation for fiscal 25. The red bar there, which moves the number down, is removing the one-time appropriations out of fiscal 25. And then each of those blue bars are the numbers that get added to get back to the fiscal 26 appropriation, which you see on the far right. So even if we remove the one-time appropriations from fiscal 25, the amount of new base spending that the governor is recommending in fiscal 26 relative to last year is a 2.0% increase. So again, thinking back to the revenue slide, 2.2% total taxes increases, she's recommending new base spending of 2%. Now, there are also increases for caseloads, as we all know. We just heard an update on both K-12 and human services, but as it relates to items outside of formula-driven, this is a 2% increase in base expenditure increase. So with that, we'll jump into some of the policies that are of importance to the governor and have been added. I think my clicker is kind of slowed down on me here. So if I can get this forwarded 2 slides. We'll spend some time on education. If we can go one more, please. Thank you. So we'll talk about education, and we'll start with early childhood education and care, and then we'll move to K-12 and then the post-secondary education. So the governor recognizes that investments in early childhood care and early childhood education are workforce development issues. We still continue to face a shortage of available child care slots across the state. We also recognize that we've done a phenomenal job of bringing new jobs and increased levels of jobs all across the state. So we want to continue the work that's been happening over the past couple of years to increase the number of available slots so that working families that choose to go back to work have an adequate daycare facility available for their children. Over the past couple of years, we've inserted about $55 million, a mix between federal funds and other funds in child care capacity accelerator grants. That's opened up approximately 5,600 new slots all across the state. So the governor is recommending another one-time SGF investment of $10 million for child care capacity accelerator grants. These grants are going to be matched with private dollars so that we can leverage the state's $10 million investment into something larger to, again, try to increase the number of available slots all across the state. The governor is also recommending $1.3 million for child care health and safety grants. These are grants that are administered by Kansas Department of Health and Environment. And they really assist providers with making small renovations to their facilities to make sure that they are compliant with regulatory requirements and also making sure that the facility is safe for the children that we're sending to those facilities. So this is a grant program, application-based program administered by KDHE for providers that make small renovations to ensure they're compliant and safe. And additionally, we'll talk about this last one a little bit later, but continuing the child care workforce registry to the tune of $1.1 million. I'll give a little bit more color on that later in the presentation. Moving on to page 11, talking about K-12 education. The governor is again recommending K-12 at the full constitutional levels that are required. This will mark the 7th consecutive year that the state has funded K-12 at the full constitutional level. She is also, again, this has been standard practice under her administration, she is recommending a 2-year appropriation for K-12. So in the budget bill that should be introduced in the next couple of days, there will be an appropriation for fiscal 26 and also for fiscal 27. The benefit of this is that it allows for predictability and stability for the school districts. As they wrap up their fiscal 26, their academic year 26, there's already a 27 appropriation there, so they feel confident in extending the contract offers to teachers for the ensuing year. The governor touched on this last night as well. This next investment, very excited about it. She's recommending $5.5 million to eliminate co-pays for meals for students that are receiving reduced price lunches. So the way it works today for any student that is receiving reduced price lunches, they have a copay of 40 cents for lunch and 30 cents for breakfast. And that might sound like a very small amount to us in here, but 40 cents for lunch and 30 cents a day, so 2 meals a day, 5 days a week times the number of weeks that those students are receiving that turns into a burden for these families that are already on reduced resources. So a $5.5 million investment here would completely eliminate those copays and provide free meals to 36,000 students all across the state of Kansas. Additionally, she's recommending $500,000 to waive AP exam fees for low-income students. When you couple this with the need-based aid investment that we'll talk about in a second, this is better preparing these students for post-secondary education. Goal here is to make post-secondary education more affordable and more accessible to more Kansans all across the state so they can continue their educational journey. Sticking with K-12 education, moving on to special education. Last year, the governor talked about her recommendation to get to the full statutory funding for special education. As a reminder, state statute dictates that the schools are to receive 92% of the excess cost for special education. It would be very difficult to get there in 1 year, so instead the governor recommended a 5-year roadmap whereby we make incremental investments each year for 5 years, and that would, at the end of those 5 years, get us to the full statutory requirement of 92%. Very happy to report that the investment that the legislature put into the budget bill last year and that the governor signed, the more than $75 million that went towards special education, went a long way to getting us on that roadmap and improving our funded ratio there. We had only been providing 69.3% of the excess costs. With the investment that this body approved last year, that moved to 75.4%, so certainly moving in the right direction. To continue to stay on that 5-year roadmap, which is now a 4-year roadmap, to get to 92% by fiscal 29, is going to require an incremental $72.6 million investment for each of the next several fiscal years. If that investment is made, the funded ratio for excess costs will move all the way to 80.7%, which is the highest it's been in quite some time. It's important to note, and I think this was touched on during the K-12 caseload review just a little bit ago, that costs continue to rise in the out years for special education. So if all we do is maintain the level of investment that was approved last year, our funding for the percentage of excess costs actually goes down by 3 percentage points. So it's the same dollar amount that we're funding, but now we're only funding 72% of excess costs instead of the 75% that we funded last year. And you can see the table in the middle of this page. If we stick to this roadmap to get there, again, we will be at 92% of excess costs by fiscal 29. The next page just shows the history of what the funding has been over the past several years. You can see there's been a mix between state aid and federal aid and what the percentages are. You can see if you slide your finger all the way up to the 2011 academic year, that was the last time that the state met the obligation that's required by statute. So let's move up a level and go to post-secondary education if we could. Again, a lot of partnership and a lot of benefit for post-secondary education has been approved and a lot of appropriations over the last couple of years by this body. The table at the bottom, or the chart rather at the bottom, shows what the funding has been for post-secondary education for the past 15 or 17 years. You can see that we went through a very extended period of time with effectively zero increases or marginal increases in post-secondary education, which left the funding stagnant. Over the past 5 or 6 years, there's been a renewed effort to put a focus on post-secondary education. And the compound annual growth for SGF and EDIF investments for post-secondary has been about 5.5% over the past 5 or 6 years. So we've done a lot of good work there. The recommendation that the governor has in front of you today is to add $51.9 million of enhancements for the post-secondary education system. You can see some of the bigger chunks that are on this table here. $14.4 million, I referenced this earlier, would go to need-based aid. Again, making post-secondary education more affordable. $10 million would be one time for infrastructure and cybersecurity. This would be split evenly between the 2 years and the 4 years, so there'd be $5 million each to those buckets of institutions. And then a couple of other items on here. There's $2 million to expand the Kansas University Medical Center Medical Student Loan Program. And then also another $2.2 million for Osteopathic Medical Services Scholarship. So last year, the legislature added a $2.2 million appropriation for this osteopathic fund. that will get that cohort of students who started through their osteopathic school with that investment. This year's $2.2 million will get another cohort of students through the 4-year program all the way front to back. So we have 2 cohorts that would receive that benefit if this investment is made. Okay, we'll move forward a couple of pages. I want to spend a decent amount of time talking about water, which I'll take a drink of right now. So before we get into the governor's recommendation and what we're going to do here, I want to spend some time thanking our federal delegation and some of our state partners. You've probably heard by now, but Congress passed the Water Resources Development Act of 2024 late last year, and that was signed into law. There was a very small word that changed in there as it relates to Kansas, and it changed the interest calculation for the 2 reservoirs that we owe debts on from compound interest to simple interest. And the net effect of that one-word change from compound to simple is going to yield a $41 million interest savings for the state of Kansas when these 2 debts come due in 2034 and 2041. I know the governor and others had reached out to our federal delegation. I'm very thankful for the bipartisan support that she reached at the federal level. I know some of you have worked extremely hard on that as well. Senator Fagg, I'm seeing you in particular, did a lot of work on that, so thank you for your efforts on that. It's going to pay huge dividends for the state of Kansas. What you see below that is the governor is again recommending full funding for the state water plan fund. This has now become the norm. We went a number of years without full funding of the water plan fund. So she's again recommending $6 million of SGF as required by law and $2 million of EDIF. On top of that, her budget recommendation does include the $35 million of incremental investments that's required by House Bill 2302. So appreciate the legislature's focus on that. Moving forward a page, the governor touched on this last night a little bit during her State of the State address, but really what she would like to do this session, and there's been a lot of groundwork done already, she wants to partner with the legislature to develop a task force in which we develop a strategic 10-year water program. This is similar to how we've modeled the transportation program. The North Star of this program, if you will, is what's called the multi-generational promise. And the goal of that multi-generational promise, is that every generation of Kansan leaves enough water supply for the next 2 generations at least. That's a bold goal, but it's a goal that we should all aspire to, and it's going to help the future of our agricultural economy and our physical health to make sure that there's adequate levels of drinking water. So as I mentioned, there's been a lot of work that's gone into this over the past 6, 7, 8 months. The governor created a sub-cabinet of sorts, led by Vijay Ramasamy, who's back here and knows more about this than anybody I've spoken with. They had 14 regional meetings and met with literally hundreds of Kansans all across the state and various stakeholders to collect feedback on what the priorities were in each of their districts, in each of the areas of the state, and what's important to them. The agencies have already started work on kind of reshuffling some of the fiscal 25 programs to make sure that we're responding to the needs of the folks that are on the ground and needing these investments. As I mentioned, the goal of this new strategic program is to model it after our transportation programs. We've had several iterations of those. We're in the IKE program right now. We've seen great success by focusing our efforts around several key priority buckets of funding. So on the bottom table here, I've shown how we see it setting up. So on the left, we show how IKE is set up. So IKE has 4 key priority areas of funding: regular maintenance, preservation, modernization, and expansion and enhancement. So similarly, we would like to set up 5 key buckets of priority funding for a water program as we move forward. That'd be water quantity and aquifers, water quality, reservoirs, resiliency, and research and education. I want to be crystal clear that by having 5 buckets, that does not remove the line item level reporting that you're used to seeing. Every single project that is proposed and that is acted upon and that is closed out is still going to have line item level reporting, and I'll show you a little snippet of that in a few slides. The change here is that we're trying to put some structure around it and priorities and some accountability around the spending of all the projects. So each project that is proposed and each project that will be developed and put into place is going to have to map into one of these 5 buckets of funding. So instead of having projects that are all across the board and trying to spend down appropriations, we want to make sure that they fit into the strategic objectives of the Water Plan Fund. We have some folks that are far better experts in this world than I am, and they're teed up and ready to give presentations to some of the agriculture committees over the next couple of weeks. My ask is that you go into those with an open mind and really see what it is that they're talking about as it relates to setting up this program. So I mentioned the conversations that we've had all across the state. What we just talked about is a strategic long-term plan and a long-term program for water funding. We also know that there are a host of needs in the near term. So the governor, instead of waiting for the new program to start, would like to invest $30 million in fiscal 26 to address these short-term needs and serve as almost like a bridge fund and bridge projects until we get this new program stood up. The capitalization for this $30 million investment is going to come from the interest earned on the Budget Stabilization Fund. Let me be very clear on this. It is not going to reduce the balance of the Budget Stabilization Fund. We are not budgeting out of the Stabilization Fund. We are going to use the interest earned from the Stabilization Fund in fiscal 26. So the Stabilization Fund today has about $1.7 billion in it, which is a healthy amount of percentage of expenditures. You can see this table right below my words there shows each of the past several fiscal years how much interest we have earned in this fund. And unlike most of other state funds, the Stabilization Fund actually retains its own interest. So even though we're not making deposits into it, extraordinary deposits, that balance continues to grow. Over the past couple of years, you can see we've earned $76 million in fiscal 24. Year to date in fiscal 25 through just 6 months, we've already earned $27.5 million in this fund. Our projections show that with the balance and the forecasted interest rates, we will earn about $50 million in fiscal 26. So even after we redirect the first $30 million of interest, that fund will grow by $20 million. And you can see that on the table on the bottom. That shows a year by year projected balance in the Stabilization Fund. And in the orange box there, you can see the year-over-year growth from fiscal 25 into fiscal 26. We still project it to grow by almost $21 million. The way mechanically it will work is every month, when we close out the month and identify how much interest was earned, we will simply redirect that to the water plan fund until such time that we hit $30 million, and then we will stop and start moving the interest earnings back into the Stabilization Fund. On the next slide here, just trying to provide a real high-level overview of how we'll still see line item and project-level reporting with the new water program moving forward. So again, at the top, you can see each of the 5 priority buckets that we're hoping to move towards, and how much of an enhancement inside the orange box would go to each of those buckets. Below that, we've broken out inside the buckets what the name of the project would be within each bucket. So again, we're still identifying what the project would be that goes into each bucket. It just maps into one of these buckets. Even further below this, that I just could not fit on this piece of paper, there's a pretty hardy description about what each one of these programs and projects is going to accomplish. So again, the agencies are still wanting to work with the legislature and identify what the needs are, talk about them, and just be strategic about it. One thing I failed to mention on one of the previous slides is as we're developing the long-term program for the water fund, or water program rather, it's going to be critical that we identify a dedicated and sustainable revenue source to keep that going, similar to what we have with transportation. The governor is not coming with any preconceived ideas. She feels that that needs to be a legislative decision. Obviously, she and the staff want to sit at the table with the legislature and think about ideas and talk about that, but really want legislative involvement on what that might look like and what your ideas are for sustainable funding. So moving into the world of human services on page 21. Let me start by saying that there's been a tremendous amount of effort and investment in waivers over the past several years. We have greatly increased the number of slots available to citizens for the IDD and PD waiver. We've increased the reimbursement rates for providers such that there's an incentive to be a provider in this world still and paying a fair price. We've lowered the cap on what the wait list can be on the IDD and the PD. The governor would like to continue investments here to make sure that we're continuing to provide services for those that need them. So to that end, we've seen an increased utilization or demand for the frail elderly, the brain injury, and the technology assistance waiver. To avoid having a wait list on these waivers, the governor is recommending incremental funding that will meet the increased demand for each of these waivers. And you can see the dollar amounts listed for each of those waivers right below there. Additionally, with all the slots that we have increased for the IDD and the PD, our fear is that there may not be adequate capacity in the provider community. So we want to make sure that we address that up front and don't set this up for failure. So the governor is recommending $20 million of one-time investments to address provider capacity. $10 million of that is to address federal compliance mandates related to conflict of interest. The Department of Aging and Disability Services has some information on that. They'd be happy to share on where that money would go and how that would help address conflict of interest that's been discussed over the past couple of years. And then $10 million for expanding provider capacity, again, in the HCBS world. Goal to be that with all these new slots we've added, there's adequate capacity to take care of the folks that are utilizing those services. Also, we've been talking for the past couple of years about standing up a new waiver, the community support waiver. Goal with this one is to relieve the stress on the IDD and PD waivers. We are nearing completion on that. So the hope and the goal, not the hope, the goal is to have that fully stood up in fiscal 26. Governor is recommending $1.5 million of SGF for the administrative costs to get this fully stood up and push this through for final CMS approval. Again, that's one-time money. And that we believe that we're going to be able to stand this up and have services available in the fourth quarter of fiscal 2026 to the tune of 500 slots. So she is providing enough SGF funding here to get the federal match to serve those in quarter 4 of fiscal 26. Full transparency, we think that number is going to grow in fiscal 27 because you'll have a full year of operations and you'll also have 1,000 slots instead of 500 slots, so naturally the investment will go up. We did not put a fiscal 27 recommendation in this budget, but I wanted to make sure I set the marker and showed on here what we think the cost would be in fiscal 27. We will, of course, address that in next year's budget, and we'll refine what the numbers are. But just want to make sure that there's full transparency on the out-year cost there. Moving on to Medicaid expansion. So on slide 22 here and what's on the screen, you can see the map of states across America that have and have not expanded Medicaid. So blue are the states that have expanded Medicaid and taken advantage of this policy, and green are states that have not. Kansas remains one of only 10 states across the U.S. and the territories that have not yet expanded Medicaid eligibility. If you break that down a little bit further, Kansas is one of 3 states west of the Mississippi that has not yet expanded Medicaid eligibility. Every state that shares a border with the state of Kansas has expanded Medicaid eligibility, so we are quite literally an island of non-expansion surrounded by states that have expanded. And 3 of our neighboring states have expanded Medicaid eligibility by a voter referendum. When put to the voters voted to expand Medicaid eligibility. This is in the governor's budget. She is again recommending expanding Medicaid eligibility. There is some federal incentives that were passed a couple of years ago with the ARPA that says that for any state that has not yet expanded Medicaid that chooses to do so, for the next 8 calendar quarters, you get an increase of 5 percentage points on your FMAP, the matching assistance for state obligations, on your base Medicaid population. What that translates to in Kansas is a reduction of SGF expenditures of $450 million over those 8 calendar quarters. That $450 million of SGF savings is enough to pay for the expansion population for a number of years, far more than the 2 years that we receive this enhanced benefit. So if I break that down to fiscal 26, that's a reduction in SGF expenditures of about $78 million by expanding Medicaid. So stated differently, if we choose to not expand Medicaid, we will spend $78 million of SGF to cover 150,000 fewer lives with Medicaid. Moving on, I want to talk about state employee pay. Again, thank you for the partnership with the legislature and working with the executive branch. There have been a host of investments for employee pay over the last couple of years. There were a number of years that we went without pay increases. There were a number of years without pay increases, but large increases in the healthcare premiums. Therefore, state employee paychecks were actually decreasing. Over the last several years, this body has recognized that our state employees work hard and deserve more, so you've done a lot of work in market adjustments and big increases, and appreciate that. This year, the governor is recommending a 2.5% statewide pay adjustment for state employees. This does come with the normal exclusions, does not include elected officials, does not include the teachers at the schools for the blind and the deaf. They're tied to their own pay plan, and does not include anybody who's on a career progression plan. So the cost for this would be $37.2 million of SGF and about $91 million of all funds. On top of the 2.5% statewide adjustment, the governor is recommending a 5% incremental adjustment for salaried folks at the 24/7 facilities. So if we step back to the fall of 2021, we were facing a crisis in our 24/7 facilities, the correctional facilities, the state hospitals, and the veterans' homes, where we just did not have enough staff to keep those in our care safe. And frankly, it was a safety issue for our employees as well. So we partnered together between the administration and the legislature and made some bold investments for the hourly employees. And I'm happy to say that those investments have paid off. We've seen the vacancy rates go down. We've seen the employee morale go up, and the employees are feeling valued. All of those efforts were focused on hourly employees, which is where they should have been. The salaried individuals at these facilities received a one-time $3,500 bonus, and that was the only increase they got outside of the statewide adjustments. So by investing just under $1 million of SGF, we can provide a 5% increase for salaried employees, which will relieve compression as it relates through moving through the ranks, incentivize folks to move into some of these salary positions as they progress through their career, and show the appreciation for the salaried employees that did not get anything back in 2021. So moving forward, on this slide, this is kind of a continuation of funding cleanup is what we call it. The governor's been focused on this over the past couple of years. We all know that there's been budget maneuvers over the past 25 years to try to keep the budget stable. So we've undone a lot of those maneuvers to get to what I would call a clean budgeting position. This is kind of the continuation of that. And what the goal of this is to align program expenditure with the appropriate revenue source. So to that end, the governor is recommending shifting some of the funding that goes to KBOR today that is an EDIF transfer and moving that over to be an SGF appropriation. This will not reduce the level of funding that KBOR gets. It just makes it an SGF appropriation instead of an EDIF transfer. Similarly, and I talked about some of these programs earlier, there are a couple of items that are funded out of the CIF, the Children's Initiative Fund. She would like for those to be SGF appropriations as well, for a couple of reasons. One, the SGF appropriation seems to more closely align as the appropriate revenue source for these expenditures. But additionally, the CIF is capitalized through the key fund, and the key fund is a diminishing resource. So we need to make sure that we protect the resources going to the CIF, and this will help accomplish that goal. So the balance of this presentation will just be on review and tables and some informational. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. On slide 29 there, what I've got are the fiscal 26 enhancements and kind of broken down by buckets of funding. So again, the base additions that the governor is recommending is $206.1 million. As a reminder, that is right at 2% of an increase over fiscal 25. Then $54 million of one-time funding for a total of $260.1 million. The next slide is just one-time expenditures, each of the projects there. I'd be happy to spend time with anybody offline to talk about these in greater detail. Slide 31, pardon me, gives an even greater level of detail on some of the expenditures, so if you want to look at those for both fiscal 25 and 26. We've got the status of the state building funds. We spend a lot of time in these bodies talking about SGF expenditures and giving them a lot of scrutiny and giving discussion, but there are a host of other funds. The state building funds, the EBF, the SIBF, and the CIBF have dedicated revenue sources, and they go to dedicated projects. They're to be used for capital projects only at certain agencies. So just showing some of the expenditures that are coming out of here, and that we are utilizing those resources, and it's been very, very helpful to make these capital investments at these facilities because a lot of them were just in really, really bad shape. So glad that we got back in a good position. Then, of course, we have the SGF outlook on page 33. What this shows is the updated revenue estimates that were spoken to earlier by Eddie, and that we have a table in here. And this is what the budget will look like at the end of the governor's budget recommendation. So if you go towards the bottom left, there should be 3 boxes. The one on the bottom right is, the third from the bottom is the ending balance for the SGF. We're leaving fiscal 26 with an ending balance of $2.2 billion. So it's 11.8% of expenditures. Still leaving $1.78 billion in the stabilization fund. And again, that's after redirecting the first $30 million of interest that fund earns. And then you see the one-time expenditures of $54 million. Before I conclude, I just want to, if we can go to page 35 here, talk about some analysis that my team does. So the way the law is structured, it requires the governor's budget report to be handled in 3 sections. The third section is a bill, a legislative bill, and that bill draft is ready for introduction. It should be ready to go. The first 2 components are what's called Volume 1 and Volume 2. Volume 1 and Volume 2, my team spends a lot of time on these, and they are always posted on the same day that the budget director's presentation is given. It provides about 900 pages of detailed analysis on everything that is included in the budget. So there's been a lot, I've received questions already this session about, hey, where do I get, how much you're spending on salaries and wages? What does the FTE headcount look like in your agency year over year? All of that's in here. So Volume 1 has a lot of narrative on each of the agencies, provides a statutory history. It goes down to the division and it shows revenues and expenditures. And at the very back of that publication, there are a bunch of schedules. And it shows all the revenues and all the expenditures for all of the funds that we have. And it's broken out by function of government, also by agency and by program. It also has FTE, authorized FTE by agency and function of government, and it's got headcount by agency and function of government. Volume 2, you get a lot more agency details. This gives expenditures at the object level, the program level, the fund level, the division level. So for example, I also lead the Department of Administration. I have, I think, 13 divisions. Got all the information that you might want to see for Department of Administration overall, and then each one of my divisions below that. So just want to point out that that publication will be posted on the Division of the Budget website at about 1 o'clock today. If anybody wants a hard copy, we're more than happy to provide you one. If you want a link to the DOB website, I can give you that. Or if you want a PDF copy emailed to you, happy to do that. It's got bookmarks, so you can go straight to where you're interested in seeing. And with that, Mr. Chair, I would be happy to answer maybe 2 or 3 questions.
Thank you, Adam. First off, I'd like to see if Chairman Waymaster, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Chairman Bellinger, and thank you, Director Profit. I don't know if you can hear me. Hopefully you can.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I want to go back to, I believe it was $375 million in reappropriations. Is that correct?
That was the amount of lapses.
Lapses. Is there a way you could provide a list of those lapses?
Yes, sir. I've got a list in front of me here. The vast majority of that is going to come from KDADs. Quite honestly, they had the largest level of reappropriations. There was about $160 million that we lapsed out of there. Department of Education was, I'll say, over-appropriated. So we lapsed about $143 million out of there. $47 million came out of KDHE, and then kind of some smaller amounts across the board. But I've got a spreadsheet I'd be happy to send to you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Then my next question is in regards to the child care accelerator grants, and you said there's going to be private dollars that will be coming in with that. Is that different than aside from the foundation that we provided with $5 million for child care last year, or is that a completely different program where we're going to be looking for private dollars?
Yeah, so I think Mr. Chair, if I may, I think the program you're referencing last year was the Dane G. Hansen Foundation.
Yes.
We did make an investment there. We also made an investment in child care accelerator grants, so they're different programs. So this would be for this one, not the same foundation from last year.
And my next question, Chairman Bellinger, does the governor have a list of all the EDIF changes? I know you mentioned that K-Board would now have their items that is an EDIF funded through the state general fund, and there are some others. And is that provided in the governor's budget report that's going to be handed out to our offices pretty soon?
Mr. Chair, if I may, thank you for the question, Chairman Waymaster. Short answer is yes. We have an updated EDIF table. We have a summary table that shows the ins and the outs and what the ending balance is, and then we can also provide a table that shows what all the programs and level of funding are. So I can email those 2 pages to you directly and also show you where it's at on the GBR Volume 1 and 2.
All right. Thank you, Director. Thank you, Chairman.
Sorry. Next, we'll have questions, and Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so going back to the child care capacity on page 10. So we oftentimes see the one time and we see another one time again. Can you just update us on how much we have already appropriated in the past several years for child care capacity grants for slots?
Yeah, Mr. Chair,
Total.
if I may, thank you for the question, Madam Vice Chair. On page 10 here, so we'd previously provided about $55 million. Again, most of that, pardon me, coming through federal dollars. I believe, I'll have to go back to last year's, I believe we had some state dollar investments as well. And we show that it increased slots by about 5,600 slots. I know I'm calling it one time, even though it is another repeat from previous years. Really, the intent behind calling it one time is we have the money today. We don't want to add it to the base. We want folks to know that if this is available right now, have to spend it now. We're making no commitment to the out years to fund it again.
Okay, I think there are some other monies out there, probably not under the accelerator grant, that actually take that into the hundreds of millions of dollars to increase slots. So then when we look at this additional $10 million, is that for the maintenance of the existing slots, or are we anticipating adding new slots?
The goal is to add new slots. We found that there was demand in excess of the supply of money, and there was more applications for these grants than what we had the capital to hand out.
Okay, and then quickly, just a couple of other questions. Back to the Medicaid expansion. Last year when you were here, we talked about the Medicaid expansion and able-bodied adults. The governor had said that they would be required to work. There would be a waiver requested. Now, is that something that she's looking to do again, requesting a waiver for work?
Mr. Chair, if I may, again, thank you for the question. Short answer is yes. She will introduce a separate policy bill, and it will contain the same work requirement as what she had in there last year.
Okay, thank you. And the last final question is a very small item. It's on the student loan program on page 14. It's an addition of $2 million to expand for medical students. Are those Kansas residents, or are those students that are committed to staying in Kansas for a period of time in underserved areas?
Let me follow up with you. I don't want to get the wrong answer because I don't want to conflate two of the programs here. And I should have started at the front by saying that any questions that remain unanswered coming out of here, my team is committed to having follow-ups by the end of the day tomorrow.
All right, thank you.
Representative Hilgerson.
Thank you. Thank you. The 78.3 million and then the 450 million, did you use those to construct the budget and the profile on page 33?
So the $450 million is our estimate for the next 8 calendar quarters. The $78.3 million is specific to fiscal 26, 2 calendar quarters of that. The way that works is it reduces the amount of SGF expenditures that are required. So yes, that is included in the budget. That money does not come until there's an SGF expenditure associated with it. They are matching dollars.
But you use that money in order to construct the budget.
The appropriate level of funding for the base population reflective of the enhanced FMAP is in the budget.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions. Mr. Prophet, thank you for making sure that I was not quoted in the Kansas City Star about what I think about certain athletic prowesses like I did a couple of years ago and going to give money for World Cup. So, and I know Chairman Waymaster talked, and I'm curious of cleaning up EDF. And that money goes to SGF, but what does that mean? Does that mean there'll be additional money for EDF? Explain that process more than just, I mean, there's still going to be dollars generated there. Are you wanting to recreate EDIF? Is that part of the thought process?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I may, thank you for the question, Representative. The thought process is kind of, it's a multi-pronged approach. One, again, wanting to get into any funds that are funding a program that may not directly align with that fund. There was a lot of that. An example would be, we all knew about the Bank of KDOT. What had gone unreported was there was additional funds that were being used to pay for KDAD's mental health grants out of the KDOT as well. So wanted to reshift those and make those SGF expenditures. Same principle here. For KBOR, we want those appropriations to come from SGF instead of EDIF. So that's one of them, just having a clean, budget expenditure matches revenue source. Additionally, with EDIF, it also had a whole host of funds transferred out of it over the same period of time to the tune of about $160 million. So the fund right now is short. So to avoid transferring SGF into the ADIF to meet the funding and expenditure requirements, this will help alleviate some of the SGF going into EDIF. So it's just switching money around, just get the funding source aligned with the expenditure.
Mr. Chairman, and we'll talk water later because I don't want to bore people. We could do that in a little day. Talk about if a 2.5% increase for state employees, we're still working on the university. I assume I know we're working on that already, still from a task force or a interim, but now all of a sudden our region universities could be behind the eight ball even more if that's possible. At a 2.5%, where might that put us with, whatever, a prevailing wage or something that we would encourage those to stay where they are?
Are you talking specifically? Sorry, Mr. Chair.
No, I'm not talking. I'm sorry. I don't mean to jump around. I'm sorry, but just looking at we've talked about retaining some state employees, not having them jump, back and forth.
Yeah. So there was a presentation to the Interim Committee on State Employee Compensation and Benefits last week, and I think what we identified is that we are still below market. There's no two ways about that. So we're below market, but we are much closer and much more closely aligned in a whole host of the job classifications than we otherwise would have been. But for the investments over the past couple of years. So this 2.5% is a recognition of a couple of things. Again, our revenue growth is slowing. So we have to choose our investments and choose how much money we can spend. And this is a $36 million investment in state employees, SGF. But also it should more closely align with what the pace of inflation is right now so that we can at least, keep our heads above water. Probably more work to do over the next couple of years, but we want to make sure that we're getting everybody the 2.5% that we believe they deserve right now, and that we can make other adjustments as we need as we do more research on those specific job classifications.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for your work, Adam. You've always been a great resource for me. Going back to the state employee pay raise, so you have no recommendation at all to bring those entities or those classifications that were identified as below market to market in your proposal?
Correct. There is no market adjustment component here. It's just a 2.5% across the board.
Across the board, regardless of how far above or below market you are?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Adam. Appreciate your presentation today.
Thank you.
Committee, the Ways and Means Committee, if you would stay in this room when we adjourn, and we'll have a quick meeting to introduce a bill. With that, we are adjourned.